O'Brien and Keiko are taking a walk along the promenade, which I guess makes it an excellent example of nominative determinism. O'Brien is gushing about a Bajoran engineer called Neela, one we briefly saw working with him in the last episode. Keiko takes the chance to tease him by implying an attraction before leaving for school. We're learning about the wormhole today, which is appropriate as we have an unexpected visitor. She's a Bajoran religious leader and one that's been adopted by a patron of the channel, so meet Vedek Sin, the Delphic douchebag. Keiko's trying to teach the science behind the wormhole, but Vedek Sin doesn't much care for kids learning what we actually know rather than what Bajoran religion believes. So much so that, after a number of interruptions to correct Keiko's teachings, Vedek Sin declares the whole thing blasphemy and goes to kick up a stink. Her husband's day isn't going much better either. Neela's still impressing him with her engineering skills and has made some repairs in Odo's office ahead of schedule. Slight problem though, the panel holding in the gubbins needs a special tool to close it, one specifically for securing critical systems, and O'Brien's has gone missing. Losing a tool is bad enough, losing one that can open highly sensitive areas is worse still, and O'Brien being adamant that he takes particular care with his kit suggests it might not be entirely innocent, either. Cisco's trying to deal with the fallout of Vedek Sin's visit to the school. Kira can give us a little background, and we learn our visitor is from a more traditional sect of their faith, and that she might make a play to be the new Kai after Opaka got stuck on the planet of Forever War a few episodes back. Kira also surprises them by agreeing with Vedek Sin. She's been clear about not wanting Bajor to be a Federation vassal from the start, and thinks Federation principles might be fundamentally at odds with the Bajoran culture of spiritual fulfillment. She's not convinced there's a middle ground that doesn't undermine either position. It's not promising, so Cisco decides to meet the person who's made all this bubble to the surface. Vedek Sin pitches herself at just the right level of meek and polite in the face of the emissary of the prophets, and even gives him some umoks. She's less polite about Keiko's blasphemy, something she has to take very seriously as a defender of the faith. So seriously as to make veiled threats about not knowing what'll happen if this heathen teacher doesn't repent. O'Brien's still looking for his tool, and he's not messing around. He's scanning the whole station for traces of the metal used to make it, and finds something in a power conduit. Bit odd, so we go for a look. What we find is a melted chunk of what used to be a tool. I suppose we could ask why this Cardigan station is using background images from Starfleet Jeffries tubes, but O'Brien's got more important things on his mind. See, he's found traces of something organic, which is a curious coincidence because Dax said we'd somehow managed to misplace an ensign today. Based on prior knowledge of Starfleet's commitment to workplace health and safety, I've got a sneaking suspicion those two things might be connected. Apparently so, according to O'Brien in the morning. He's telling Keiko that Bashir confirmed the organic matter used to be people-shaped, and he expects a DNA check to prove who it is. The melted ensign also made a log about checking that particular conduit last night, which raises some questions about why Dax was expecting him for a duty shift in the morning, but let's ignore that for now. O'Brien's walking Keiko to work again and wants a lolly like the one he was eating at the start of the show. A slight problem, the vendor tells him to bollocks. O'Brien's not in the mood, and Odo tries to clarify why the vendor is refusing service, but Keiko can guess and wants to move on instead. There's no sanctuary at the school, as Vedek Sin's been practicing how to rouse an angry mob. Don't worry though, she's got a perfectly reasonable solution. If you won't teach Bajoran religion, just stop teaching anything mentioned by Bajoran religion. That means not mentioning the bloody great wormhole they're sitting right next to. Keiko's not in the business of deliberate ignorance and declines. That gives Vedek Sin the chance to claim that she tried to find a compromise before she and the mob leave, taking the Bajoran children from the school. At least calling the register will be quicker now, I guess. We're having a meeting about the atomized engineer we found bits of earlier. An accident makes sense from a technical standpoint, but O'Brien's struggling to get past the idea of a Starfleet engineer taking tools without asking, and for a repair that wasn't critical. It's enough to get Odo interested, and Cisco suggests he poke around a bit. While everybody else goes off to do real work, Cisco acts like a manager and instead has a chat with his son, who's apparently allowed to just pop into a critical area of the station whenever he feels like it. It's about what's happening in the school, so at least it's useful data. Keiko carried on teaching for the remaining kids, and her lesson was about Galileo being persecuted by ignorant religious arseholes. Not exactly subtle, but she's had a bad day. Jake's drawing the obvious parallel and basically says Bajoran religious stuff is equally backwards. To be fair to Sisko, he's willing to defend belief in the prophets, not just because faith was the backbone of the resistance, but also because his own experience with whatever's in the wormhole could technically be considered prophetic, what with them existing outside of linear time. The lesson is that refusing to see other interpretations would make us as ignorant as Vedek Sin, and that's perhaps why Sisko decides to try and get another perspective on things. This is Vedek Bareil, a religious leader who does things a little differently, and is currently favoured to become the new Kai. Sisko wants him to organise a meeting with the Assembly, what they call their collection of religious leaders, to see if we can find a solution to the school problem on Deep Space Nine. He's destined to be disappointed. Vedek Bareil may be a progressive, but even he understands how the real world works. If he lends his support to Sisko, seen by many as problematic for a number of reasons, that might harm his chances of becoming the next Kai. Shy of something to massively change public opinion, he's on his own. Being on his own may be literal as well as figurative. A few Bajoran crew members have decided to pull a sickie and not turn up for their shifts. Kira gets an earful and told to sort it out, but the bad news keeps coming. Bashir's done a science on the aerosol ensign we found and has discovered some troubling news. He died from getting fried all right, but the frying in question was at the business end of a gun. Getting turned into a cloud by a power conduit happened afterwards. There's some good news of a sort. He got murderized before Vedek Sin started causing problems, which suggests it probably wasn't related to our current disagreement. And Odo has a lead on where the guy died, as a computer log says he took a lift to a shuttle bay. The mega shuttle in that particular bay seems fine when O'Brien and Neela go for a look, and she doesn't find anything unusual in the computer of it either. We also learn from her that Federation and Bajoran don't mix much outside of work, as the former are seen as a bit uppity by the latter. It's a fair call, and she softens it somewhat by saying O'Brien's not like the others, which is also pretty accurate. As he tells her to clock off for the night while he finishes up, we switch to Odo watching a load more Bajorans arrive on the station. They're here to offer Vedek Sin their support, which probably means Odo will have to keep on his toes for the foreseeable future. O'Brien joins him there with a gizmo, something he says he's used for screwing with security. O'Brien decided to check all of the shuttle bays just to be sure, and found it in a different one to where Ensign Corpse got deaded. He thinks that's a bit weird, but Odo argues it makes sense. If the ensign interrupted someone doing dodgy doings in the first shuttle bay, they'd move to a different one after killing the guy so the gizmo would have less chance of being found. All that remains now is to understand why someone was dicking around with the security systems, the answer to which may have something to do with the school, as it's just kaboomed. Nobody's been hurt, as school was finished by the time of the kabooming. Kira says whatever did it was made from readily available ingredients, so was probably an amateur job. Still, it's made a lot of noise, and that means attention. What better time, then, for Vedek Sin to jog over and feign some concern? Sisko's in no mood for her shit and tells her as much, blaming her rabble-rousing as the direct cause of the bombing. She responds by saying he's soulless, which is pretty ballsy when she was calling him the emissary of the prophets not 30 seconds before. Suggesting your gods got it wrong is probably not a popular position among those who give it more than a second's thought. Sisko thinks attempting to demonize him and the Federation will ultimately fail, as the people who've been here for months know they're nothing of the sort. He believes people will tire of her fire and brimstone catastrophizing and says as much before leaving. Vedek Sin doesn't seem too chuffed at developments, and neither does Neela, who shares a knowing look and a nod with her. Something positive has come from the bombings, though. Vedek Bareil has decided to get involved and visit the station. Maybe it's altruism, maybe he just thinks highlighting how Vedek Sin's actions have caused violence might remove a political opponent. Regardless, Sisko's taking him up on it. That might not be the best choice for his health, though. Neela and Vedek Sin are talking in the station's shrine, and it's clear things are proper dodgy. Neela was arranging a mega-shuttle to leg it after committing an unspecified crime, but one serious enough to warrant execution. The escape route has gone pear-shaped thanks to O'Brien finding the hacking gizmo, but Vedek Sin doesn't care. She thinks Neela's glorious sacrifice will be a true testament to her faith, as long as it doesn't get tracked back any further, obviously. O'Brien's in ops, and he's found something odd. There's an unknown program in the computer, and according to the computer itself, he put it there. Looks like someone's been covering their tracks by faking him, and as Vedek Bareil arrives on the station, he's trying to figure out what's going on. The program shows a planned escape route to a shuttle bay, but that's irrelevant now as he already found the hacking gizmo that would have let someone nick a mega shuttle. What it does show, though, is where the escape route starts, and that's on the promenade. Whatever someone's planning to run from, it'll kick off there, so he has the computer scan it for anything unusual. Speaking of the promenade, Vedex, Bareil and Sin are there, and the former is asking the latter to visit the school ruins with him as a joint show of strength against extremism. Back to O'Brien, who's in Odo's office now. The computer tracked an anomaly to here, and in the same system he and Neela were fiddling with earlier in the show. The specific bit showing a problem controls detectors for weapons on the promenade, and that's enough to give Cisco a call and warn him that Neela might be dodgy, and there may be some guns knocking around too. It's pretty good timing on O'Brien's part. As Vedek Bareil is winning over the crowd, Cisco sees Neela with a gun. Her shot misses, and Cisco, having a bit of a wrestle with her, prevents a second. She's bundled away by Odo as Kira puts it all together and accuses Vedek Sin of organising all of this just to coax Bareil here. Removing the person most likely to become the next Kai would leave her with a far greater chance of succeeding. Bareil, it would seem, is not the only one who understands how politics works in the real world. We can't prove it, of course. Neela's saying it was all her idea, and we've got no evidence to the contrary. Kira's struggling with how things have turned out, yet another example of how much more complicated everything is compared to when she could solve everything with a gun. On the plus side, we've stopped an assassination attempt, and Cisco being the one to save Vedek Bareil certainly doesn't hurt our reputation. And Cisco's little speech about working together struck a chord too, at least with Kira, if nobody else. That's about as good a result as we could have hoped for, and we leave them to work on finding more common ground until the next adventure. It's easy to look at current political discourse and assume that obviously sleazy shitbags abusing religion as fuel for hatred, often to distract from their own failings, is a recent thing. It's not, of course. That sort of nonsense has been going on for as long as we've had gods, and I regularly despair at how effective it can still be. Saying your way of doing things would have been supported by whatever deities you choose to invoke is as meaningless as saying Megatron from the Transformers would have voted for you and should be received with a similar level of mockery by the public in general. Hate's a wonderful drug, though. Having someone to blame for your life not being perfect is cathartic, and even better when you're told that you've got the backing of Jehovah, or Allah, or Indra, or Zeus, or Sheogorath, or Grandfather Nurgle, or Q. The more nebulous the entity, the better, as you can't be proven wrong if there's nobody to query for fact-checking. Vedek Sin, the Delphic douchebag, lives up to her full title in this debut. The prophets work in mysterious ways, and who's to say why the instructions she was totally given by them honest just happen to coincide with things that'll bring her more power? I guess they must really trust her. She's a great antagonist, a slimy, weaselly little shitheel of a person, and a perfect example of those who distort ideology for personal gain. She's exactly the sort of person you can imagine urging disgruntled people into acts they wouldn't normally have performed without her provocation. It's worth noting, for example, that the bombing of the school in this episode is never explicitly tied to Neela. It's probable, based on Vedek Sin's plan, but by no means certain. There's every chance that she had other agents on the station, and who knows, maybe Cabradine and Infernite are also used in the creation of Jumja sticks. We've examined the tensions between Federation and Bajoran people a few times, and this is more of the same, but with an important difference. In the episode Dramatis Personae, there was the chance everybody acting against the Federation was controlled. For this story we have no such excuse, and it shows us that, while those at the top may be getting along well enough for the most part, there's still plenty of resentment among the people who actually keep things running on the station. That's understandable given the situation. Kira's felt much the same on many occasions, and she actually has the power to change some things if she wants. The poor schmuck who has to empty the fluid canisters in Quark's holosuite has no such voice, and it's easy to see why that perceived lack of control would fester after being promised a glorious post-Cardigan future. When your victory party is over and you realise things aren't quite as rosy as you imagined, it's understandable that you'd be drawn to someone who tells you that the fight isn't quite finished yet, and your promised land is waiting for you just over that next Federation-shaped hill. Speaking of Kira, if there's a charge to be levelled at the story, it's perhaps that Kira's about-face at the end felt a little too abrupt. That's a limitation caused largely by a lack of time, I suspect, and it wouldn't surprise me to learn the original script needed condensing to make it fit. Still, a few nods to Kira feeling uncomfortable about how things are playing out would have made her accusation to Vedek Sin and the disillusioned speech to Sisko flow a little better than they did. Perhaps it was excluded because Kira's already had that sort of thing happen to her a few times over the course of the season, and the writers didn't want to retread the same path. Either way, it doesn't detract too much from an otherwise excellent story, and one that sets up many conflicts to come. End of episode.
1 week until the court case, then.
You're not asking me this time?
No, I think we've played that one out by this point.
Thank the prophets for that. Yes, we are in court next week. And, hopefully, that'll sort all this out and we can finally get round to exploring the station.
Well, exploring the station slowly anyway. About 1 or 2 new locations per season, I should think.
That makes sense. We can't be expected to explore more quickly with these tiny little legs.
Nice one, yeah, that's a great excuse. So, anyway, you want to go first?
I hear Quarks is fun.
You think he'll be alright serving dogs?
I think he'll be fine serving anyone with money.
Yeah, but we haven't got any money.
We haven't got any money yet. If we can show the court that we're a diplomatic delegation, then detaining us becomes a political issue. I think we can argue for a generous compensation package to avoid an incident.
Good lad. This might be a nice little earner for us. Woof.